Hello there. My name is Matt Taylor. I'm the professor of saxophone at the University of Central Arkansas, and I'm overjoyed to be joining you today to talk about my time in France, studying in France in particular. I'd like to say thank you, of course, to the incredible Nathan Nab for inviting me to do this presentation. When he first approached me about potentially talking to you all, I said, well, what on earth would I talk to everybody about? I was getting very intimidated by the other people he had coming in to give these presentations. And he said, well, why don't you talk about France? And so I thought, well, that's a great idea. I should definitely do that. Um, I used to think when I was younger that everybody should study abroad in some way, especially if they wanted to somehow be associated with performance in the future. And as saxophone players, of course, we have this very deep connection to France and this very rich history, both through the repertoire and through sort of the different periods that our instrument has existed. But my journey to France didn't really start like that. It started much younger. As a child, for whatever reason, my parents could never really point in any particular direction why, but I was always very interested in France. And so I decided from a very young age that I was going to do my best to get to France someday. And by gosh, it happened. So anyway, I have a few things written down here that I'd like to share with you. I have some pictures that I'm going to share with you from my time there, but not many of them. I promise I won't go too crazy with that. And there's no getting around it. We're in my living room, and so I feel like it should be pretty informal. If you have questions, I do hope that you'll ask them, and I'll do my best to answer them. And if you watch this video later on, I think it'll notify me if you type a question, and I'll respond. And of course, you can always get in touch with me directly if you have any questions. I should also mention, I know that several of our wonderful colleagues in France are a part of this group. And if you would like to either promote something that you're doing in terms of a camp or an opportunity for students to be there, I hope that you will chime in too in the chats or in the comments and let everybody know what's going on and the best way to move forward. And feel free to correct me. It was 2005 when I studied in France, and so a lot of time has passed. And so perhaps some of my information is not the most up to date. You'll definitely want to check into those things if you are really interested in pursuing this. I thought a fun way to start would be to introduce you to 20-year-old Matt. And so this is a picture of me, and I'm holding it up because we're informal. Look at that. This is like a really terrible, this is what happens, this is what you look like before you do a doctorate, and this is what you look like after you do one. The hair was first starting its loft there, but this picture was taken actually in Bordeaux, France, where I was studying. And as part of my preparation for this, I thought it would be fun to go back and reread my journal. I kept a journal very carefully while I was there because I wanted to document my experiences. And so it just so happens that I have an excerpt from my journal, 20-year-old Matt's journal, on April the 3rd. And so I thought I'd share it with you. And it's actually almost incredibly linked up because it was April the 3rd, but it was at 3 o'clock. And so depending on where you are, this might be 3 o'clock. Here we go. Spring has sprung in Bordeaux to the extent that this morning I abandoned my butter and bread for a nice jog around the river. Of course, I had butter afterwards and a nice tub of yogurt and several cookies, but that's not the point of this. As I was saying, it is springtime, and though I must scale high mountains of laundry to get to my kitchen table, I am here enjoying the day, the mild temperature, the smell of flowers. I don't know if it is merely because I have been inside so much practicing, but it seems to have happened almost overnight. The trees in the city that were completely bare a couple of days ago are now fluttering with young leaves so green and bright, one might think that some unseen city official has been secretly watering them at night with Sprite or 7-Up. And the pale facades of buildings that were once spiderwebbed with pencil-colored vines are now festooned with lacy green leaves and heavy clusters of wisteria. In the public garden across town, there's a new carousel. The ducks and people are pairing off, and before long we'll need to be thinking about college funds. Plums, grapes, kiwis, and strawberries are covering counters and sweet-smelling waves at the grocery stores and outdoor markets, and people have all but ceased ordering hot chocolate for large cups of ice cream and tangy sorbet the color of Skittles. The fashionistas of the city are bringing out their flowing linen pants and fluttering shirts. The men of the city have begun to loosen their ties and leave their shirts unbuttoned to such a low level, it is almost as if they were interrupted while dressing and hadn't gotten around to finishing quite yet. The river that cuts the city in half is a constant flux of lows that seem to churn the sediment into frenzy, thickening the water until it is like mocha, then moving so high and swiftly that it is almost like a zipper closing the city in on itself. Bordeaux is beautiful, and I am getting no work done. These are the words of a 20-year-old guy who is completely in love with France and in love with life. My time there was some of the happiest moments of my life. It was some of the most challenging moments of my life. And certainly it was one of the most formative experiences that I've had just as a human being and as a musician, of course. So let's start a little bit before the beginning. This is our prologue, and answer the question, why did I study in France? Well, to answer that question, let's back up a little bit more. I actually went to school for my undergraduate degree here at UCA, where I teach. And I say with Jackie Lamar, who is a really exceptional teacher and is really well known in our community for all of her musicianship, for her excellent teaching, and for her work on the Committee for Women as a part of NASA. And she's just a wonderful person in general. And when I first met her in high school, her daughter happened to be a French teacher. She majored in French and she taught French lessons and whatnot at public school. And so she knew that I had this kind of connection to France. And she said, well, Matt, maybe you should go and study in France. And I didn't really think a whole lot about it. I mean, I thought that would be a nice thing to do, but I didn't feel like I had a good enough reason to move my life over there. As time went on, I guess it was maybe not long into my freshman year, I found that I really was very interested in contemporary music. This is about the time that you started to see music by composers like Christian Loba kind of showing up in the United States. Certainly his music had existed before then, but it was getting a lot of play during those years. And so certainly all of that was far beyond my technical grasp. I couldn't do any of those extended techniques like slap tonguing. I could do multiphonics, and I was pretty proficient in altissimo, but I wanted to do all of those things, and I would go into my lesson each week and I'd say, I want to know more about how I do these things. And Dr. Lamar told me, she said, well, Matt, if you want to do this stuff, you have to go to where they're actually doing it. And so I started looking for options. I was in an honors program at UCA, and part of that program gave the opportunity for you to have funding to do some kind of a study abroad experience as a part of your degree. And so that was when it sort of became real, when my teacher said, maybe you should look into this and really see what would happen. Well, it just so happens that later that year, the World Saxophone Congress was being held in Minneapolis. It was a fantastic conference. I'm sure many of you who are my age and a little bit older were at that conference. And I realized that that would be a great opportunity for me to meet some professors, who were teaching over there. And I was right. There were a lot of people kind of converging on the Twin Cities. And so I kind of camped out backstage whenever I saw a name that I thought would be an interesting person to go and study with. I'd camp out backstage and pounce on them as they got off of the stage and introduce myself to them in somewhat halting French. I had studied French a lot when I was in high school, and I continued that study into college. And I thought that I was very, very fluent. And of course, I was not fluent at all, but I thought that I was. And so armed with that confidence, I would introduce myself and share some information with those teachers. The first person I talked to was Claude DeLong, and the second that I said bonjour, I think he caught the vibe and he switched to English. And we had a very formative conversation. And I basically invited myself to CNSMDP in Paris and said, I'm looking forward to studying with you someday. And he was very gentle about it and said, maybe you should study with some other people first before you try to come to the most high-level conservatory in France. In retrospect, probably that's good advice, but it stung my feelings a little bit. And then I met a couple of other people, and finally I met Marie Charrier, and I was very interested in talking to Marie Bernadette Charrier because of her level of specialization in contemporary music in particular. And so for me, this idea of studying contemporary music specifically was very, very important. And so when I first met her, she literally had just walked off of the stage, and so it was very clear that I had not seen her performance. I listened to the door though. She still had her saxophone in her hand, and I started trying to introduce myself in French, and she was just like, "One moment, one moment, one moment." So she put her saxophone away very graciously, and then I started to talk to her, and I said, "I'm very excited to meet you. I think that the direction that you're going in music is very exciting." All this is in French, of course, and I'd be very excited to come and study with you in France. And I give my best big American smile, and she kind of grinned, and she reached out and touched my cheek, and she said, "How sweet you try and speak our language." And then she roared with laughter. So I was completely confused about what had happened, and so I went back to my hotel, which was not far away from the convention center, from the school, and I looked at my little French phrase book at what I had said, and I thought that I had been telling her that I was excited to meet her, but I had been telling her the whole time that I was sexually aroused to meet her, that I was sexually aroused to come and study with her in France, that I found what she was doing in music to be very sexually arousing. It was horrifying. And even now, I can feel my cheeks turning pink thinking about it, just how incredibly embarrassing that moment was. But she was really great about it. And I ran into her the next day at the conference, and she came up to me, and she was the only one that I had spoken to who actually came up to me later on. And she told me, well, she asked me when I was coming. "When are you coming?" And I said, "To Bordeaux." And she said, "Yes." And I said, "Well, whenever, I guess." And so she gave me her email address, and she said, "Send me an email and we will work things out." I couldn't believe it. I felt like I was in some way, just because of that very kind gesture on her part. So I went and told Dr. Lamar that we were going to France, and I think she was very excited. She said, "Go for it." You'd have to ask her what was going through her mind at that time. Because she'd been telling me for a long time that I should do it. And so finally I listened to her. And so that was what set it all off. That was how I got my foot in the door. And that was how I made that move to studying across the pond. Let's talk about some options that you might have to study in France. I studied in France for a full year at the conservatoire, and that worked really well for me. It wasn't as a part of a particular degree program. So here are some other options that you have. There are lots of short-term options, like that are from anywhere from like about a week to even a few months. And the one that comes first to my mind is the wonderful Université Européenne du Saxophone in Gap, which is in a beautiful little tiny village and has usually, I mean, every time there's just incredible saxophone teachers there, incredible performances, and that's a lot more reasonable in price than going and staying for an extended period of time. So if budgetary concerns are a reality, that might be an option for you that's very, very good. I knew that I wanted to go there for a little bit longer than that, and so I didn't really consider it. Since going and becoming a professor myself, I have had students participate in the GAP program, and they loved it universally, and I've seen great benefits from it. So that's one that has a recommendation, certainly from me. Habanera sometimes does a summer program, the Quatuor Habanera. Those guys are fantastic, and they have a great program that they do in the summertime. And I'm sure that there are others that our friends in France, our colleagues in France, can let you know about, either in the comments for this live video or elsewhere. And probably some Googling, you could find a lot too. Another option for short-term study, at least in the United States, with visa requirements and things like that, you don't have to have a visa if you're not planning on working for a short stay, something less than 3 months. And so if you wanted to, if you're the kind of person who does well without a great, like, very structured schedule, you could make some contacts with various professors in France at the conservatoire, or even freelance performers, and arrange to meet them for lessons. And that's something you could do if you're very independent. And certainly, you don't have to be a student to do that. I could do that right now if I wanted to. Very few people will turn down, cold hard cash to teach you something. And so you don't have to be so locked into this idea of you have to do a degree. Something that I remember about myself, and that I see sometimes in my own students, when you're young and you're first starting out playing, a lot of us are on this path. You're sort of experiencing the choices and the decisions of an 18-year-old, or even younger than that, 15, 16, whenever you decide that you love music. And then as time goes on and you get into the sort of the grind of an undergraduate degree program, in particular if it was music education like what mine was, it can be an awful lot of work to get behind. And so sometimes you can become very focused on the objective of getting a degree rather than the objective of learning as much as you can. And so an option like this could be very beneficial, just to go and pick a few people and take some lessons. It could even be on the same repertoire. And then you could still get the benefit of some instruction. If you're thinking about more long term, which is of course what I did, there are basically two routes you can go in France. You can get a degree of sorts, a diplôme, a licence, a certificat, something like that, or you can just go and study in the class, either as an auditor or as an actual member of the class, and you can go through the concours d'entrée, the entrance exam, and all of that. Generally speaking, a knowledge of French is going to be very important for that, especially if you're planning on doing those degrees for credit. You'll have to do some French exams. You'll have to have a chest x-ray, and you'll have to do some visa work if you're going to be staying for that length of time. For me, the French degree plan is different enough from the United States that it's difficult to fit to really say what corresponds with what. The way that I determined what program I was going to enter was I spoke directly to Marie Bernadette Charrier, and I sent her, this is how long ago, I mean, it was 2005, but it feels like a million years. I actually made a DVD and sent it to her in the mail. I can't even imagine. I mean, can you imagine doing that now? And so she got the DVD, and I couldn't figure out the formatting, and it just faded to black, and then would randomly come back up. I don't know why she accepted me. But I'm glad that she did. My materials were not great that I sent her, but they were I prepared really hard for it. And maybe it was maybe she just had a memory of our first meeting, and so she just wanted to see what was going to happen next. That could very well be. Anyhow, so I sent her that, and she said, okay, you should be in this cycle. And so she put me into that cycle, and I still had to audition once I got there. But I knew that I wasn't going to try and count this toward any credits at my own university. The only credits that I could get were theory and history, and I was far enough along in the degree that really wouldn't make any difference. And so for me, that worked great because I had this incredible freedom to just go and practice and do the things that I thought were the most interesting, which for me was studying with her. I also took an analysis class, and I played in a couple of ensembles. I played in a quartet, and all of that was very, very formative and enjoyable. And it was such a departure from what I had been doing in the United States, where I was doing so many degrees, so many degree requirements, I should say. And so it was a good time for me to be able to really focus in on my own process, my own technique, and my own practice, and to get really great advice from her. So there you go. I'm not going to give you a whole lot of information about the French conservatory system in terms of degrees because it's cumbersome, and I'm afraid I'll tell you the wrong thing. Just know that they're not quite the same, although they are offering a master's and a doctorate of sorts. And it's certainly possible to do an entire degree there. Several of our wonderful colleagues have. Alison Balchetis was in the saxophone class with me in Bordeaux, and she did a master's degree in performance in association with the Université de Bordeaux, deux or trois. I can't remember which one of it was, either two or three. You have to ask her about it. And then, of course, several other people in our community have done full degrees there. So you can ask them about that. I'm not a whole lot of use, in terms of doing all that sort of stuff. I actually did not wait until I finished my undergraduate degree. That's the other thing that I should mention. This honors program at my school, they had this system where you could get a grant. They called them travel abroad grants. And they still exist to this day, actually, at UCA. And we have students every year that take advantage of those. And so they awarded me a grant in my junior year. And the stipulation is after you finish the travel abroad program, you are obligated to return to the university and share what you've learned. It's sort of this community of learners kind of model. And so I went to France after my junior year. I put my financial aid at UCA on hold, and I moved to France for a year, and I did that program there, and then I returned and did my senior year at UCA. So I went from Bordeaux Conservatory to marching band. It was a very interesting, very whiplashy kind of experience for me. Okay, let's talk about if you're going to do this. I mean, let's just be real. How are you going to make contact with these people? Email and Facebook, of course, are great options nowadays. You can get to know a lot of people that way, just kind of cold calling them, sending a message saying you're interested. I always think it's a nice gesture if you're going to be speaking to someone in France to try and write at least part of your email in French. You can write it in English too, make it clear that you're not a necessarily French speaker if you don't have a lot of fluency in the language. But just in terms of politeness, that goes a long way, and I think is very appreciated. And you can Google around and find all the different conservatories in France, and who teaches at them. Not every conservatory has saxophone, and not every conservatory has saxophone at the level that you would want to take it at as probably a university student yourself. So the way that I think it's best, though, is to try your best to meet them at a conference, especially if you have the means to go to a World Saxophone Congress. Or even on one of the bigger NASA biennials. Sometimes we have guests from overseas who come to those. I just think that's a really good thing to do because it shows a certain amount of seriousness. And I think that it's easier for them to take you seriously when you're expressing enough of an interest to make the sacrifice to attend something, to spend some money and show up somewhere. If that's not possible, then that's okay. Make contact with them the best way that you can, and that will be enough, and you'll end up being with the right person for sure. Let's talk about the preparation of doing something like this. It's not something that you can do impulsively. It takes time, especially if you're going to be staying for some long period of time, more than 3 months, because that requires, like I said, visa work and things like that. I would recommend no less than a year ahead. But for me, it was really almost 2 years ahead that I first made contact with Marie and went to France. In that time, I felt like I was working toward that goal basically the entire time. Certainly, I was practicing a lot. I had a lot more focus. Google Earth had just come out, and so I took a satellite picture of the conservatory and printed it out on really big paper and put it on the wall of my practice room with thumbtacks. And I would practice my scales just like frantically staring at this picture of the conservatory. I'm very goal-oriented in that way. And so the practicing is part of it, yes, but you also have to look into getting all of your records straight. You have to have your passport, you have to take that to the consulate and get all the different visas, and then you have to, it's a whole process, and it changes fairly regularly, and so you have to make sure that you're doing everything in the right way and in the right order, so that everything is, so that you're not met with surprises when you get there. Another thing to think about is housing, and I was very fortunate because Marie was she basically co-signed on an apartment for me, and she did that with several students in that era, and we all meaning most of the international students who stayed with her, lived in sort of the same residence that was sort of subsidized by the French government, so that it wasn't quite so expensive. I can't believe it, but my rent for a little studio apartment was like less than 200 euros a month while I was there, which was just really important because I had basically $7,000 to live on the entire year. I still can't believe I was able to do it. And so that you have to request a year ahead. And so again, there's sort of a protocol for doing all these things. The earlier that you can express interest and start working toward it, the better off you are, because you don't want to try and scramble and get things done at the last minute, especially once you're in France, because things just take a little bit longer in France. Bureaucracy is a French word, after all. After doing all of this work and finally arriving in France and going through customs, then you actually get to start lessons. And that was one of the most thrilling parts for me of studying in France, was getting to meet all these other saxophonists. And so after the entrance exams that we took, which were like 4 or 5 rounds, and I was admitted into her class. After all that happened, we had our first lesson, and I met almost all the other students the previous night, the night right before classes. It was in those days, saxophone day was Tuesday, so this would have been a Monday night. And Pauline, one of the members, one of the French students in the class, said that we'd have a party, and I asked what I could bring, and one of them said, "We can bring, something tasty to eat, but no alcohol. We won't be drinking because we have practicing to do." So that's a very different frame of reference in the United States for a lot of people, I'm sure. And I learned why there was such focus pretty quickly thereafter. Would you like to see a picture of the saxophone class? Of course you do. Of course you do. Here we go. Look at us. We're all little babies. So this is this on this side here in the yellow shirt. That's Francisco. He's still in Spain. Extremely talented saxophonist. Next to him in the pink is Pauline Alla, who is teaching in France and is just an incredibly beautiful musician. She also just got some credentials in jazz. Her father, you might know, is Thierry Alla, who wrote digital and lots of other compositions that are really remarkable and usually quite difficult. Behind them in the purple shirt is Shang Qing, who's from China. And I think that he's the professor at the conservatory in Shangqin. I'm not sure, but he's a professor at a conservatory in China now. Next to him, in the light blue shirt, is Jesus, who's playing up a storm and living in Spain. In the yellow is Julien Deforge, who was 18 years old. He was the youngest person in Mary Bay's class at the Conservatoire, and he's playing jazz exclusively these days, jazz and rock and hip hop. We're Facebook friends. He's a cool guy. In the back, next to him, is Nicole Strum, who was from Canada, and she's now teaching in Canada. A truly remarkable, very gifted saxophonist and teacher. That's little bitty baby me in the black shirt. And then on the end is Alison Balchetis, who is teaching in Canada now, but she was coming from John Sampin's studio in Bowling Green. And then not pictured in this picture is Tong Yang, who's teaching in Beijing now. So, I mean, as you can see, this top class, it's extremely international, which is not something that I was really expecting for whatever reason. I expected most of the students in the class to be French, and certainly in a lot of conservatories, that is the case. But one of the things that really surprised me most and that I found extremely enriching was getting to meet all of these people from different places. And not only that, but getting to learn about repertoire that they knew of that I had never even heard of before. So yeah, it's a very tight knit group, and it was a really nice, cohesive group. So we had that nice little party. The next day, I went to room 310 in the Bordeaux Conservatory. The stand said Jean-Marie Landex on it in magic marker. And I was loving life. I was really excited. I was really nervous. And I walked in, and the lessons are group lessons in France. Most of the time, you'll see saxophone classes as a group. And when I walked in the door with my saxophone on my back, three of the students were in the corner and they were solfeging the Iber concertino at tempo. Just all the solfege syllables. And I thought I was going to throw up. I had never heard anybody do that before. I mean, it seemed like magic. And I literally was in the door thinking, maybe I should just leave. Maybe I should just turn around and just go home because I clearly don't belong here. And they were all laughing and joking. And I turned to maybe escape, and Mary Bay was there. Now, Mary Bay Charrier is one of the most important influences in my playing of any teacher that I've had. And she is very different personally than she is in class. In class, she's very, very businesslike. Personally, she's very kind-hearted, very warm. In class, though, she's extremely critical. It is a very, very serious atmosphere. She tells you the complete, total, unvarnished truth. And that kind of an experience is not something that I had really had. I had had a lot more sort of a softer touch, we'll say. And Mary Bay was not really like that at all. She's very old school in the way that she teaches. I remember when I saw her in France and I was actually interacting with her. I went to her house for lunch before the classes started, and she was going to give me a few lessons to get me ready for the entrance exams. Her husband is Christophe Havel, really fantastic composer of contemporary music, and I met him first, and I said, Monsieur Charrier? He said, no, 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 Monsieur Havel. And so he went and got Mary Bay, and she came down, and so I started referring to her as Madame Charrier, as one would do. And she corrected me, and she said, Matt, in French, Matt, it's not Madame Charrier, it's Mary Bay. I don't respect authority, and I don't expect you to either. So what a welcome, what what a way to introduce yourself to somebody. And I saw from then on in her class, I mean, all of us were there. Class started on Tuesday, I think at like 9 o'clock in the morning, and it just went all the way through until like 7:30 at night. We'd stop for an hour for lunch. And in the early days, we would all be there for everybody else's lesson. As the year progressed, we kind of moved into two groups. And so you had to be there really for everyone in your group. But you could choose to be in the other group as well if you wanted to see everybody. But at least for the first half of the year, maybe more, we were all there for everybody's lessons. And it was honestly, it was just like fireworks went off every single time we had lessons. Her energy, her focus, her demands, her teaching, it was unrelenting and incredibly inspiring. I asked her after the first lesson where she got her energy from, and she said that she loved it, and she expressed that certainly. So, what did lessons look like in that era for us, and what did we do? How are they different? Well, I was from a music education background at a small regional public university, and so I tried to do a fair amount of pieces, and I did etudes, but it was nothing like the expectations that we had in her class. We worked out of Les Gammes, the Jean-Louis Landec's book, with we played scales in thirds and in fourths and diatonically, and we played all of the different arpeggios that go along with that. We would work on those with a partner, so you had to play them in unisons or in different formats. So you'd use all these different articulations, and she expected you to be able to play all of these into the altissimo register all the way up to high E flat. And sort of the minimum acceptable tempo was 120. And same thing with the chromatic scale. The first day, I remember it very clearly. I mean, my palms are almost sweating. I can remember it so clearly. I walked in, and we all lined up. She just told everyone to get into a line. So we all had altos, and the whole class stood in a line across the studio. And she said we were going to start with the chromatic scale. And Tong, my friend Tong Yang from China, was right there next to me. I was number 2. And she asked him the tempo, and he said 120. And so that became the tempo for the whole class. Tong played his chromatic scale, and I was expecting him to hit F sharp and come back down, but he went all the way up to E flat and all the way back down. And then she made him do it again because she wanted to play it one time slurred and one time tongued in one breath. Whew. So then it was my turn, and I played all the way up to high F sharp, which was as high as I could really comfortably do it, and then all the way back down. And she looked at me and she said, "Can you not play in the altissimo register?" And I said, "Yes, I can play certain notes." And she said, "Well, next week, be able to play it all the way up and down at 120. And so then the rest of the class went through, and every single person was doing this. It was just like that was normal. And I suddenly felt like I was completely abnormal. That disequilibrium is another really valuable experience that I had while I was there. Certainly my colleagues in the United States who were taking saxophone lessons, they liked the saxophone too, but our sense of what was normal was different from what their sense of normal was. The people in the room that I was in suddenly they were playing at a level that was so much higher than what I thought really anyone would need to be able to do, that it caused me to adapt to a new sense of normal, which was really rewarding and very helpful and a little bit intimidating, honestly. So after we did scales for maybe an hour, hour and a half or so, playing all the different permutations and whatnot, then we would go on to repertoire and etudes. And so we would do an etude out of the Landec's Nouvelle Etude Variée, which I think, this is where I teach right now remotely, which is right here. I still have my copy of the book. It's missing the cover because it's so well loved. And you can tell very quickly, this was the first one I prepared by myself. There's very few marks on it. And then the next one that I did, that Mary Bay marked up, she would just stride over to the stand and just get a pencil or a pen and just start going to town, showing you all the things that you weren't doing right. So we had to do one of those every week. And then we'd also do another piece with piano, like either a sonata or a movement of a concerto, something of that nature. And we do one of those every week as well. The pianist for the studio is an incredible pianist named Hinomi Sakaguchi Manyan. She was born in Japan and she studied in France and uh, achieved great things as a solo pianist, and then decided to settle in France. And so she plays in piano in Proxima Centauri, which is Maribel's chamber ensemble that she does all these incredible concerts with. You should check them out if you don't know them. Very avant-garde, very new music. And once a week, we would meet with Hinomi individually, and she would coach us through the pieces and let us know things that we needed to do. She knew the repertoire really well. In fact, when she was in Japan, she took saxophone lessons for a little while with Ryo Noda. So her connection to saxophone was pretty profound. And just an incredible pianist, as you might expect. So after lunch, we would all stand up and play our pieces with piano with Hinomi. And then after that, we would do our contemporary pieces. And Maribel usually liked us to play that on a saxophone other than alto. And we had to rotate through those pretty quickly too. So it was a very fast-paced environment. We were just tearing through repertoire. And the benefit of this, of course, aside from personally, from just playing so much and having the expectation be so high all of the time, was that when you're in the group, you're hearing her teach all of these pieces that maybe you aren't necessarily playing yourself. But imagine if your whole college experience was studio class. I mean, you're getting to learn from your colleagues, you're getting to learn from your teacher, and you're always under a great deal of pressure to perform because you have an audience all of the time. And it's not just any audience, it's your colleagues whom you respect and admire. And so it's a very different atmosphere and feeling than I have working with students now individually. Very, very valuable and very exciting, to experience something like that. We also had a couple of concerts through the year, or chamber concerts, that we would prepare. With the solo concerts at that time, I don't know how she does it now, but at that time, we would prepare these studio concerts, and we had to continue working on music with her. So basically, the policy was we would do a piece with piano from memory. She wanted us to do it from memory, and we would do our best. Sometimes we'd get it, sometimes we wouldn't. And we would do another contemporary piece. And the stipulation that she gave us was that we needed to do our own repertoire for those. In other words, things that she has not heard us play, things that she has not worked with us on, while still maintaining the expectations of the class. And so we would still have to be going through pieces really, really regularly and performing them in studio class and whatnot. And then the other requirement of these performances, which were honestly rather grueling, was that we weren't allowed to warm up before we played. We would have these concerts at like it's at like 9 o'clock in the morning, right when the conservatory opened. And the first notes that we would play, maybe a couple before your tuning note, which was just crazy to me. I couldn't understand why on earth, why can't you warm up a little bit so you have a good performance? And no one ever came because it was 9 o'clock in the morning. You can't go to a saxophone concert at 9 o'clock in the morning. And so I asked her after the concert, after just feeling like a little bit defeated that I wasn't playing as well as I wanted to, I said, why on earth why are we doing this? And her wisdom just absolutely, it's inspiring to me to this day. She said, well, in your life, there will be times that you are not able to warm up before you play a concert. And so I'm giving you that experience now so that you know what that feels like and you know that you can do it. I had never even considered something like that. I mean, it seemed cruel to me before I understood the rationale behind it, but she was giving us this chance in a very, very safe environment to possibly not do very well at something so that later on we could use that and stand on that and know that we have the skill to do what we need to do. And I will say that since that has happened, every single important job interview that I have had, the schedule has worked out in such a way that I could not warm up before I played. Hello, Julia Nolan from Vancouver. I remember hearing Julia Nolan play Tableau de Provence at that World Saxophone Congress that I mentioned with the silver saxophone. I thought it was absolutely beautiful. So yeah, it was a really eye-opening experience for me. It was something that that I think about even to this day, that gift that she gave us to be able to this gift to be able to know that you can do something because you've already done it in a safe place. Um, so yeah, that was the concerts that we had to do, and it was a wild experience. Toward the end of the year, and I should also mention while we're going on that there are a lot more holidays in France, and so the conservatory would close, and you couldn't get anything. A lot of things in the city would close, and so there was sort of built-in downtime, which was very, very nice. And we got to travel and see the country a little bit. The conservatory also didn't stay open super late, so you couldn't do like those late night practice sessions. I think it kind of, in some ways, gave us some sense of a normal schedule, without flipping your days and nights, practicing all night or whatnot. Because I think we would have practiced all night given the option to do so. Um, and then after the year had kind of progressed a bit, it became time to prepare for the concours at the end of the year, the final examination. And so there was a required piece that was published a little bit earlier. And the year that I was there, for our cycle, the exit exam was, I think, the first movement of the Tomasi Concerto. And since I wasn't going for the degree, I did the second movement of the Tomasi Concerto because I thought that would be funny. And then you also do another piece, another contemporary piece. So you do two pieces in front of the jury, and that really is your grade for the whole year for saxophone. So it's a very high pressure experience. One thing that's interesting about that is that your professor did not sit on the jury. The year that I was there, the director of the conservatory sat on the jury, a composer, another instrumentalist from the conservatory sat on the jury, and there was also a saxophone player from another place in France. The year that I competed, it was Jean-Michel Goury. In the past, it has been Claude Delange, it has been, I think Vincent David maybe has done it. Jean-Michel Dex has done it before. And so it's another person from France who comes in and listens to the juries. Another saxophonist comes and listens on the juries. And so you play your piece, and then at the end of the day, the director of the conservatory goes around and announces the grades publicly for who passed, who did not pass, who goes to another year of the degree, repeats the year, whatever. It's a very different experience from how secretive we are with grades in the United States. I have to say, I think I prefer our method in that way. We have a little bit of time left. I've enjoyed getting to share some of this with you. Before I show you that, I'm going to show you one more picture of me and Marie Bay. This is us in the famous room 310 in Bordeaux. And wearing, you can see our height differential there. Marie Bernadette Charrier with her hair in a ponytail. It was a hot day that day, and I think I was working on a piece by Christian Loba in that. You can see I'm wearing head to toe French clothing, which I got on sale very, 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 very cheaply and didn't quite fit me. Mary Bay would have saxophones at the conservatory. She'd always use school-owned saxophones because she would often ride her bike to school. And so I think we were working on Veer by Christian Loba in that etude. And that's often what lessons would be like. She would either be sitting next to you where she could demonstrate something, or she would be at the very back of the room with the scorer as you're playing, yelling at you things to change. And so you had to really focus because lessons were so fast-paced, you really didn't want to stop. And so, because you get in trouble if you stopped. And so, as you were playing, she would say things that need to be heard. That's too high. That's flat. More support, more sustain. That sort of thing. It was very intense at the time. Now I realize that she's trying to get through a lot, and it's just her ears. She's being so honest that she's telling you completely unvarnished every single thing that she hears. That's not for the faint-hearted, but isn't it valuable? I mean, isn't it nice to maybe find a person in your life who will tell you exactly what they hear, and 100% that when they tell you that you did something well, or in Mary Bay's case, if she says you did something not bad, that it really does mean something. I think that's important and compelling, especially if you're very serious about being as excellent of a musician as you can be, to have someone who's going to make those kinds of statements to you and is going to be just honest with you, just tell you the complete truth. Let's talk about, as I kind of close this out, and if you have questions, please feel free to ask. the benefits that I really wasn't anticipating. Um, One of the great pleasures that I had, in addition to working with Marie Bay and Laurent Soulier in analysis, and various other really special people, and my colleagues, is learning about new composers. While I was there, I got to work with Henri Pousseur on his quartet, um, which was just really tremendous. Vue sur les jardins interdits. He came in several times and worked with us and coached us on that music. And I met lots of student composers from all study in France, the same way that I had. Those relationships blossomed into a lot of premieres, and working with them is still one of the high points of my professional career. Just really incredible musicians of their own right who are now all over the place. And then other repertoire from other countries, Slovenia, Japan, China, all of these, Spain, composers whose music I would not have known if I had not been studying with people from those countries who were promoting that music and who were interested in that music. That is a long-term, really valuable thing that I took from that. Another thing that I learned personally was just the joy of playing music and learning music. Sometimes it doesn't feel very joyful, and sometimes I confess, it didn't feel very joyful. It felt like a grind. But knowing that I was not going to be evaluated in a way that would negatively affect a grade or affect, how I was going to graduate or whatnot, that was very formative for me as well. I was able to just make music and try to do my best and not be distracted about trying to meet certain expectations. Certainly, we would not meet Mary Bay's expectations because she was always trying to push us to the next level higher. And I think the other thing that was very helpful to me was just learning independence. Having to live away from home is a challenging thing for a young person the first time you do it. And living in a foreign country, even when you can speak the language, can be a very challenging, exhilarating experience. And I can tell you lots of stories about things that happened that I might have messed up dates or gotten lost or gotten confused or spent too much for something, that I shouldn't have, gotten scammed a little bit. All of those things are part of growing up. And for me, going to France and not being able to pick up the phone and call my parents right away every time something was going wrong, it really taught me to be independent and help me grow up. There is a time in our life, and it happens for everybody, where the interests and the goals that you set for yourself as a child are different from the goals that you set as an adult. When I first came to UCA as an 18-year-old, I had certain goals in mind for what I wanted to do. I had an idea for what music was. I was going to be a professional jazz musician. I was going to tour the world. And very quickly, I realized I had this passion for teaching, and I wanted to work with other students. And I really wanted to be a college professor. That my dream shifted in a very dramatic way. And what happened was I kind of grew up. I wasn't pursuing the saxophone because it was the shiniest instrument and because of Hoot the Owl on Sesame Street, who I thought was very cool, very cool. That wasn't the reason I played the instrument anymore. I was now playing the instrument because I wanted to express something inside myself. I was now playing the instrument because I wanted to reach a point in my life where I was able to work with and guide other people. And so all of that became just, sort of, the things that were important to me before then were very cursory. When I came back from France, I had a greater focus on who I was as a human being. And it was a very powerful and moving moment in my life. And it's one that I would do again 100 times. I'd love to go back and revisit all of the places that were special to me in Bordeaux. And I have since I have a student right now, a former student, who is studying at the conservatoire with Marie Bay, which is a very rewarding thing for me personally. Brandon Hildebrandt, who is currently in her class in Bordeaux and is finishing up his degree there. So it's a big circle. It's a big circle. And if you're considering studying in France, I hope that you will. If you have questions about it, I hope you'll reach out. If you want to talk to me, hey, I'll tell you the truth. And certainly the truth as I see it. Make connections with people who are already there. Talk to people who have gone to France and studied in different places with different teachers. I mean, I could write you a whole list, and I hope people will comment in this video who have done it and would be interested in talking with others. I see Steve has made a post here with Jean-Yves Formeau. Fantastic. it's a great way to learn how to play music. It's a great way to develop discipline, and it's a wonderful way to eat a great deal of cheese and butter if you're so inclined to do it. And I mean, I think that alone is reason enough to do it. I hope this has been helpful. A huge thank you to Nathan Knabb for setting this up and for giving us a chance to connect with each other from one living room to another. It is a great privilege to get to share this series with so many people who inspire me personally. Oh, I see a question from Noah. Okay. Thank you. Noah says, great talk. Could you talk more specifically about Mary Bay's approach to helping you interpret contemporary music? How does it influence your teaching of contemporary music? Obviously, you can only respond broadly, but wondering if you can touch on it. Gosh. Mary Bay's approach to contemporary music. Thank you for asking that question, Noah. Noah studied with Mary Bay as well, but not at the same time as I did. I'm older and more haggard. Mary Bay's approach to contemporary music is so vibrant and exhilarating. And the thing that surprised me most about it is that I actually went to study with Mary Bay specifically for contemporary music, and she barely let me play any for the first, gosh, really great period of time. She really had me do a lot of the classic French repertoire that I had not done. And I think that she was trying to help me because so many of the things that she played and that she promoted were outside of a more tonal universe. She wanted me to gain the skills of understanding how one sound moved to another before we expanded that color palette outward. And so I worked a lot on sustaining a phrase all the way through, all the way to the end. Oh, I'm sorry. No, I was saying it was Jean-Michel Goury. Jean-Michel Goury was on my jury. That was the connection. There you go. So Mary Bay was pushing that forward, this idea of sustaining a phrase all the way to the end when you possibly couldn't sustain anymore. It's a very French aesthetic of playing music. And so her focus on contemporary music was very much what is written in the score. And then she became, after you were able to play everything as it was in the score, she was really all about finding the voice of a particular composer. We had a chat because, of course, Dave Lehman has that book, Developing Your Personal Saxophone Sound. I'm paraphrasing there, I think. And so we asked her about a particular sound, how, what kind of sound do you have to have, a good tone or a bad tone, whatever. And she made this statement that shook me to the core. And she said that she did not use her personal sound when she performed, which I thought was completely ridiculous. And so I asked her, and remember, she told me not to respect authority here. So I asked her, I said, but I can remember hearing you play pieces. I could recognize your sound. And she said, no, you can recognize my sound on that piece. And so she was all about changing the timbre and the texture of the sound, the way that she performed a piece of music to make it in the voice of that particular composer. Which is something we think about with like string players or even other woodwinds playing Mozart versus Beethoven. She did the same thing with contemporary music. She is so educated and so well versed in those compositions that she has this huge array of knowledge to draw upon when she creates sound. If you listen to her recording of Digital by Thierry Alla, I think that you can get that on, I hope you can get that on YouTube. It's sad because a lot of her recordings are not easily available in the United States, and they're just incredible. The way that she manipulates the timbre and the color of the sound, is just really incredible. And if you listen to her recordings, you'll understand very quickly that each piece has a different sound. Each composer, she approaches it in a unique way. So that's one of the bigger takeaways. I'm sure there's a million more that I could talk about, as far as that goes. Let's see. Dean says, how does the cost of attending college in the U.S. compare to this college in France? Oh, it's no comparison. My tuition for the entire year at the Bordeaux Conservatory when I was there in 2005 was 123 euro, 128 euros, something like that. Basically less than $200, well less than $200. It's almost free. There are drawbacks to that, of course. I mean, if I had been in France, it would have been basically free as a French citizen. But even as an American, it cost almost nothing to go to school there. Yeah. Can you imagine? That's one of the reasons why I think it's a lot easier for Americans to go and study in France than it is for the French to come and study here. Why would you come and study in the United States for, $58,000 a year when you could study in France for nothing? There are a lot of reasons. I mean, I think that at least in my experience in Bordeaux, the school and instruments were very good and very high quality, but the facilities weren't that great. There were not many practice rooms. We had to rent them out. There certainly wasn't a fitness center. There certainly wasn't a rock wall. There certainly wasn't a lazy river. And the venues weren't as nice. I mean, the venues in the United States are very posh in comparison to what they are in France. All right, let's see another question. Stay with Jean-Michel Goury for the summer of 2015 when the Sax Congress was in France. Yes, I missed that one. I was somewhere else. Did lessons for a few months, as you described, and stayed in hostels. It's a very different environment there for sure. Thank you very much, Andrew. Yeah, I have very, very happy memories. Oh, and Nathan Nab coming in the clutch for Mary Bay's Digital. Certainly the definitive recording of that work, I think, although there are lots of other extraordinary versions of that piece in particular. All right. If you have more questions, please feel free to write in the comments here, and I'll try and keep an eye on those and respond to them. Big thank you to Nathan Nab. Thank you to all of you for spending some time in my living room today talking about France. And I wish you all the very, very best in these strange times. I look forward to hopefully seeing you in person very, very, very soon. I'll leave you with one more little story. For those of you who've been with me since the beginning of this video, the week before I left France, Mary Bay, the Anglo-Saxons, me and Alison Balchetis and Nicole Strum invited ourselves to Mary Bay's house for a little going away party for ourselves. Can you imagine? And I asked her, after she had had a couple of glasses of wine, if she remembered the first time I had met her and said all of that stuff. And she laughed very heartily and said, "Oui." And I said, "Well, it's still true." And it's still true. Thank you all very much. Have a wonderful rest of your day.